In my early 20s, fueled by a sense of adventure and a desire to explore the vast landscapes of America, I embarked on a hitchhiking journey from Texas to California. The open road beckoned, promising experiences and encounters that would shape my life. Little did I know that one fateful ride would forever haunt my memories. It was a hot summer day when a beat-up car pulled over, its engine sputtering as if on its last breath. The driver, a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and piercing eyes, offered me a ride. Something about him seemed off, but with limited options, I reluctantly climbed into the passenger seat. As we drove, conversation was awkward, and we didn't talk too much. The man's demeanor shifted radically, oscillating between unsettling silence and sudden bursts of excitement. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. As the miles passed, the man's behavior became increasingly erratic. He spoke in disjointed sentences, veering from one topic to another without rhyme or reason. I started to fear that I was trapped with someone who was mentally unstable, and the weight of my vulnerability sank in. An overwhelming urge to escape gripped me, and I searched for an opportunity to flee. It was then that I noticed the car slowing down, veering off the main road onto a desolate side street. Panic surged through me as I realized that we were headed into a secluded area, far from prying eyes or any help. Instinct took over, and without a second thought, I unbuckled my seatbelt and flung open the car door. I barely hesitated, letting my survival instincts guide me. The man's surprise mirrored my own, but it quickly transformed into a sinister glare as he lunged toward me. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I sprinted away from the car, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's shouts echoed behind me, growing fainter as I distanced myself from the nightmare that had unfolded. I didn't look back, fearing what I might see. I ran until I made it to a nearby house where I pleaded for help and I alerted the authorities. As I sat in the safety of the abode, trembling and recounting the terrifying encounter, a mix of relief and lingering fear washed over me. The reality of how close I had come to a potentially disastrous situation had settled in, forever altering my perspective on hitchhiking and on people. From that day forward, my journey continued with caution. I relied a lot on public transportation and avoided isolated rides, and I prioritized my personal safety above all else. The encounter did dampen my spirit for a little bit, but ultimately, I completed my journey and made it to California. Looking back on it now, it's almost kind of funny to laugh at, but at the time, it certainly was not. Where to begin? Well, I'll start when I first saw the ad on Craigslist. It stated that the person was looking for a responsible and hardworking person to edit wedding films in the Philadelphia area. I'd been into film since I was 5, and at the time, I was working as a cashier at a local grocery store, so I felt this was my chance to finally get a prestigious job as a filmmaker. I responded to the ad and got a response in a few days. He told me his business. I looked up his films and they were genius. I have never seen such high-quality wedding films. They really told a story and I was intrigued. A few days later, we planned an interview. It was a dreary day when I went to his worn-down apartment in a city that was local, but not in the best part of town. As I walked out of my car, he greeted me at the door. He seemed nice, but I felt a little off. I'm very good at sensing people's emotions, and for some reason, I couldn't sense normalcy in the way that he acted. It was strange. He did everything that was considered professional outside, and then we walked up to his apartment and office. He was 23 at the time, a self-made entrepreneur, a wedding film business. I remember one of the first things that he said to me. "If you work for me, I won't teach you just about video. I'm going to teach you about life. Being the naive 21-year-old I was, I thought this guy was just a really good businessman. Sure, he sounded full of himself, but what boss isn't? I got the job and was ecstatic. I felt on top of the world working for one of the best videographers in the Philadelphia area. I came into work the next day and ended up working on one of those TV dinner tables with a computer on it and a rickety chair. I didn't care. I was doing what I loved and it was awesome. A few months go by and I started noticing his weird behavior. I remember a specific time when his sister came over to visit him, and I met her for the first time. She wanted to get to know me, so she kept asking me questions about my life and trying to make jokes with me, but he wasn't having it. This was the first time that I sensed that something was seriously wrong with my boss. As his sister would try to engage me in conversation, he would tell me to shut up and do my work. Apparently, a 5-minute conversation was too much time to be wasted. I quickly learned the editing program, as I've edited extensively in the past. I eventually was editing 1 to 2 films a week, and despite my boss being sort of strange, I thought it was still the job for me. This was when the craziness had started. I started to learn the DSLR cameras. I began learning his basics of editing skills in his films. I'm very talented in video editing, but sometimes it takes weeks or even months to learn how a particular company goes about their editing. The first thing I noticed is that he had clinical depression. He would look to me to support him and make him happy again. I thought I was being a good friend or employee by offering sympathy because of the fact that I've been suffering from depression since I was 12. Eventually, the therapy sessions became a little uncomfortable. He would put his arm around me, despite the fact that I had been with my boyfriend for 3 years. One time, he got me so high on marijuana that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. To me, it didn't matter. My boyfriend smoked weed, and this was a great time to finally get into something that he enjoyed too. As the months went on, I started to notice things that I didn't before. He was working behind a huge mahogany desk with a large screen, while I was working on a TV dinner table on a small laptop editing most of his films. So then came the shooting part. I began to learn the basics of shooting a wedding, getting the right shots and the right lighting. It was then that I started to realize this man was unstable and possibly aggressive. There were nights when we would do a same-day edit. These were 3-minute videos that the company would create for the couple and show at the end of the evening. It was a stressful environment. He was usually the one editing these same-day edits in the beginning, but the pressure was terribly strong. I would film with people that he knew for years that had their own video companies. I was ignored, I was the outcast, and I sort of followed them around. I felt useless, but I held on knowing that eventually I would learn the trade. As the months passed, I was his main editor. I edited all the films, chose all the music, and sometimes would lead my own shoots when he had another shoot somewhere else. I found myself to be extremely talented. I knew how to make a film beautiful, and how to make a story of love meaningful. I noticed that he loved to criticize me over time. If it wasn't the audio, it was the video. If it wasn't the video, it was the lighting. If it wasn't the lighting, it was the photography. If it wasn't that, it was me. I began to beat myself up. How could I not be good enough when I was trying my absolute hardest? Was I a failure? Should I even be in this field? There were a few more same-day edits that my boss would do the edit on. It was extremely stressful because I had to make sure we had all the awesome shots we needed in order to make a fantastic film. Eventually, I edited my own same-day edit. I cried because of their reaction. I feel I'm a pretty sympathetic person, so I saw their happiness and felt whole when I saw that. Despite the pressure, I continued on with my job, but as I continued, I noticed more aggressive behavior on his behalf. He would start hitting on me, flirting endlessly and giving me back rubs. Do you know how creepy it is to get a back rub from your boss inside of his own house? It was a small business, so that's where we worked, out of his own home. It started becoming more of a hangout session rather than work. He would tell me about his low self-esteem and would somehow work his way into putting his arm around me. I felt extremely uncomfortable during these times, but I was naive, and I had no idea how to approach the situation. He eventually became an angry person. He would scream at me in the car or belittle me at a shoot. I felt like I was nothing and that I was an idiot. I felt that I would never become the amazing filmmaker that this man had become. He constantly belittled my edits. He would say, "The film is boring and you need to redo it." But all the while he was on his computer surfing the internet, while I edited these films to perfection. Over time, I realized I was doing everything besides booking the gigs. I was editing the film, I was burning the DVDs, I was posting blogs, and I was shooting weddings, and I was dealing with this man. The man that made me feel like I was small. Eventually, I started standing up to him. He didn't like that. How dare someone challenge his ideals? I noticed when I did question his ideas that he would become aggressive. He acted as if because he was 2 years older than me and owned his own business that I was a schmuck, and without him I would be nothing. The flirting and belittling continued. I was told that I was not meant to be with my boyfriend. He started becoming more physical, trying to connect with me by introducing me to sci-fi shows. I enjoyed them, and I believe this was his way of having a hobby between him and I that I did not have between my boyfriend and I. And so, the physical contact went on, and I, a naive kid, thought he just didn't realize social norms. He was socially screwed up and had to read books about how to be a good person, and how to persuade people to do things. I thought he didn't realize that touching your employee over and over again wasn't the right way to go about things. No, I was wrong. He knew exactly what he was doing. Over time, he continued to touch me. He would massage my shoulders and he would insist on a huge, much longer than a normal hug. He was in the pickup artist industry, and after a while, I felt like his prey. Eventually, I started standing up for myself and becoming equally aggressive towards him. I began telling him that I wasn't comfortable with his touching. I called him out on his BS. I told him his yelling at shoots was irresponsible and cruel. I mentioned that his personality was narcissistic because he wanted to know what I thought he was. I told him that he was socially messed up and that it was pathetic, that he had to read a book to understand how to be nicer to another human. He eventually accepted what he was, I think, because at this point, things started getting worse. There was an instance when I couldn't find the car where he parked to retrieve his cell phone. He was waiting at the front desk at his venue to figure out which room the bride was in. It was about a 15-minute walk to the garage, and when I got there, I started panicking because I couldn't remember which floor we had parked on. We eventually ran into each other, and he immediately started screaming at me in the elevator, with 2 people in there as witnesses. "It's floor 5, how could you not know that? We park there every time." My boss yelled at me so loud that the 2 men in the elevator were noticeably scared. When they left, I told them that I was quitting once and for all. I couldn't stand this anymore, the yelling, the belittling, the nonsense. I was done. 2 weeks later, I was working on an edit on a laptop at his house. It would be about a month until I was out of there. I know I was being very generous with my time, but I was trying to do the right thing. I remember distinctly him talking to me, joking around, and then grabbing a pocket knife on his table which had been fully extracted. He held it to my neck. He tried to play it off as if he were joking, but I knew that he wasn't. I joked with him so he would release the knife. For the rest of the night, I was incredibly scared, but I wasn't about to tell him. Remember, this is a sociopath. He gets off on fear and he gets off on power. Finally, the knife was away from my throat, and for the rest of the night, I played the loyal employee. This is when I finally said, "This is it." I was scared for my life. When is it ever okay to put a knife to a person's throat, no matter how well you know them? It scared the crap out of me, and in a week I told him that I was leaving his company. He was enraged. He pounded on his steering wheel as I told him this in the car. This reminded me of the time we went to NYC to shoot a huge wedding, and on the way home he freaked out because he kept taking the wrong exits. He pounded the steering wheel that night, was driving erratically, and was verbally abusing me apparently for not reading Google Maps correctly. I don't own an iPhone and never have. I don't know how to use them very well, so I guess I was the idiot. Not the guy who I was in the car with who kept taking the wrong exits. I was stuck in a car with a madman. I just couldn't take it anymore. The knife, the yelling, the touching, everything. I eventually left this job and got a job with a mutual business friend. I can't explain to you the fear I felt with a knife to my neck. At that moment I realized that I was definitely working with a psychopath, and that I would be killed if I did not leave that situation immediately. To this day, I haven't talked to him in about 2 years. He ruined a huge part of who I am. I used to trust people and I used to believe in those who had a dream. But this man, I could go on for hours about all the terrible things he has done. I barely even cover the evil things this man has done to me. Back when I was attending university, I used to work on campus at one of the dining halls during the dinner or night shift. I lived in the next town over since it was cheaper to live in a crappy little apartment out of town than to live on campus in the dorms. But I didn't own a car, so I had to take the bus to commute. One night, I had just gotten off a shift at work. My feet were killing me and I was completely exhausted, and I slowly made my way to the bus stop. I noticed a man much older than me sitting on one of the 2 benches at the otherwise empty bus stop, but I didn't pay too much attention to him. I simply sat down on the second bench and listened to some music while waiting for the bus to arrive. The first sign that things were starting to get weird was when I kept noticing out of the corner of my eye that he was staring at me. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, so I looked over and caught him quickly turning his head to look away. Okay, so he was staring at me. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary since being a young college girl seemed to gain me a bit of attention from older men. So like usual, I just ignored him. That was a mistake. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him look at me. But instead of just staring at me this time, he got up and walked over to sit next to me instead. I continued listening to my music, hoping that he would see my headphones in and take the hint that I wasn't interested in talking. But instead, the man literally took them out of my ear. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said as my head snapped to look at him in shock. I should have told him off for touching my things and demanded that he leave me alone, but I was sort of frozen, and I didn't want to make him mad. Hi," I replied quietly. He started introducing himself as Mike and telling me that he lived in the area, and that it was always nice to see pretty girls like me at the university bus stop. He explained that he was a real man, unlike the boys that I went to school with, and that I should go home with him that night. I was a shy, scared girl who had never had a man be as bold as this to my face. I say to my face because I had certainly got my fair share of unsolicited private pictures online by that point, but I digress. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. But that didn't stop Mike from continuing to explain to me all of the fun things he wanted to do with me at his place that night. At that point, I wished that I was anywhere else but that bus stop. But it was just the 2 of us in the dark alone, as I counted these seconds until the bus would arrive. And then Mike took things to a different level of shocking by telling me, "Listen, the demons want me to ask for your phone number, and they say that you should give it to me or you won't like what happens." He actually had the audacity to start stroking my hair. His hand was gentle, but I didn't want him touching me at all. And this was shocking for a number of reasons. The demons, I wouldn't like what would happen. Why was he touching me? What the heck was this guy talking about? As though he could read my mind, Mike went on to explain. "My therapist knows the demons are real. I told her about them and she says that I'm not crazy and that the demons are real." He laughed and then abruptly stopped. "No, give me your phone number like they said," he demanded. As his hand stroked my hair for the last time, he stopped and gripped the back of my neck, still gentle but even more terrifying. I was scared, and obviously didn't want him to have my phone number, but he was taking out his phone and I knew that he was going to call the number I gave him to make sure that I wasn't lying to him. And he still had his hand on the back of my neck, so I reluctantly gave him my real phone number. It's stupid, I know, but I was right, and he immediately called to check. All I could think about was just not making this guy angry long enough to get away from him, and then I would block his number. Thankfully, the bus came moments later. I sat down as close to the front of the bus near the bus driver as I possibly could, since the bus was basically empty. Mike decided to sit directly across from me. At this point, I tried listening to music again, hoping that being on the bus and him having my phone number would signal to him to end our conversation. However, he decided to reach over and unzip my sweatshirt, revealing my work shirt and the name tag, which I had unfortunately forgotten to remove in my haste to leave work that night. I hadn't told him my name yet. Abigail, what a beautiful name. Our daughter will be named Celeste. I shouldn't have been shocked at this point, but I was. I had stopped listening to music again and zipped my sweatshirt back up, which made him laugh. "You won't need that soon anyway," he said, and he winked at me, implying how he had planned to do what he wanted to do further that night. At one stop, Mike tried to convince me to get off the bus with him. I told him no, that I was tired and just wanted to go home, and so he said okay and he stayed on the bus. I knew that had to be a stop, so the fact that he was staying in the bus worried me. I was sure this meant that he was planning on coming home with me instead. "Baby," Mike whispered to me. I tried to ignore him, but he repeated himself louder. "Baby." He had the most unsettling smile on his face as I asked, "What?" He laughed and told me, "The demons say you smell nice." I was terrified and felt like I was going to throw up by the time my bus stop arrived. I lived in an apartment alone and I didn't want him to know where I lived. Despite my body being exhausted and sore from work, adrenaline kicked in and I bolted off the bus and ran straight home. I made it inside and locked the door. I looked through the peephole and I didn't see him, so I went carefully to peek out of my window and saw him standing near the bus stop, looking around. He took out his phone and sure enough, I started getting a call from an unknown number since I hadn't saved his number. I ignored it. When he hung up, I started getting several texts, asking where I had gone, how he didn't like hide and seek, and how the demons just wanted to have fun. I was so scared because he knew which apartment building I lived in, where I worked and where I went to school, my phone number and my name. The only good thing which made me feel slightly relieved was that he didn't know which specific apartment number I lived in. And that's when he started yelling outside. There were no specific words said, just wordless yells of what I could only assume were frustration and anger. I blocked his number and I kept all the lights in my apartment off as I cried with my back to the front door. Maybe I should have called the police, but my brain was so frazzled that I didn't even think of that until the next day. And by then, all I knew about him was that he was a mentally unstable man, probably named Mike, who hadn't actually done any physical harm to me, so I didn't think that it was worth it. In hindsight, I know that I made a lot of stupid mistakes during this experience. I ended up moving away entirely at the end of that term of school for unrelated reasons, but until then, I switched to day shifts at work and was paranoid every night. Thankfully, I never saw the man again though.